Is there any more enduring image in all of video gaming history than that of the lone starship facing down the invading alien horde? No, there isn't. Not in my opinion, and my opinion's king around here because it's my sodding show, and if you don't like it, well, you can just piss off it, I suppose. But seriously, don't. Please stay. The Shmup has been transporting players to its Battle of Thermopylae and space-inspired concept for decades. Indeed, you could argue the premise, so gripping in its narrative, so beautifully simple in its execution, is the spark on which the video gaming Big Bang is built. Ask anyone that was alive during that golden era what the first game they played was, and chances are they'll probably say Space Invaders. Go on, ask them. Only you won't, will ya, lazy bastards? Don't worry, I've done it for you.
First game I ever played was Space Invaders.
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 Of course, Space Invaders wasn't the first video game per se, but it was undeniably the breakout hit that brought games into the mainstream conscious of the public at large. Helped no end by the soaring success of a certain galaxy far, far away, whose influence on the video game industry really can't be underestimated. As the creator of Space Invaders, Tomohiro Nishikado himself said, "At the time, I was trying to decide what the focus would be, and had heard of a sci-fi movie being produced in America called Star Wars. I thought a space fad might be on the way, and decided to focus on aliens." Now, Pac-Man may well have been the next bona fide mega hit, but it was among a succession of other big-hitting shmups that the sustained video game push was built from, with titles like Asteroids, Defender and Galaxian all doing huge amounts of business for arcade operators the world over.
Shmups were just awesome. It was futuristic. People wanted the future because the future was encroaching so quickly on the 80s and technology was moving so quickly, and spaceships and space was just it.
In the period spanning the end of the 70s and the start of the 80s, shmups were undeniably the kings of the video gaming kingdom, bestowing massive amounts of respect upon the players that could master them. So ably demonstrated here by Art Garfunkel moonlighting as the world's worst investigatory journalist.
What was your highest score on Defenders? My best score on this was 26 million, I'll just say 26.5 million. I got the... That's quite a score. Yeah, I had the world record on it. World record at the beginning of last year. Great.
So, what happened? How did the once most popular genre in all of gaming become the preserve of an ever-increasingly niche audience, panning for titles from an ever-decreasing pool of developers like thirsty crack addicts, desperate for the next delicious pixel-laden hit? In the late 70s, the public's ability to be floored by tech innovation with regards to this exciting new medium was an altogether fresh phenomena. I mean, just look at these two thrill seekers discussing how they got their kicks in a pre-video gaming world.
When we grew up, we didn't have these games. What we had was Monopoly. What did you play, stickball?
Stickball and beat up the kid next door.
Oh yeah, beating up the kid next door. Classic childhood banter with that one. Space Invaders not only offered revolutionary gameplay, it offered players an entirely new level of pants-shittingly immersive virtual reality. People instinctively knew that Pong was essentially a game of table tennis, but it was a game fooling no one in terms of the in-game reality it was offering. People playing it didn't see a pair of bats, a ball, a table, and a net while they were playing the game. They were acutely aware that the basic shapes in front of them were merely representations of real-world objects. Because, well, let's be honest, most balls aren't square. Space Invaders changed the entire narrative. Sure, the graphics were just simple manifestations of a war in space, but they were enough to make people believe. Move the ship, shoot the alien, hide behind the base. The game offered tangible assets, transporting the player right into the thick of battle, and the stakes felt infinitely more real because of that. As graphical capability improved through the early 80s, the shmup genre was able to ride the wave without changing very much in terms of the game's pure mechanics. So the genre continued to exist, making small incremental changes here and there. Defender with its increased levels of complexity, Galaxian with its colourful sprites that moved as if having a life of their own, each offering satiating the ever-growing fanbase of rabid gamers hungry for the next challenge. Some even found addiction to this new medium beginning to take hold.
Some social workers would like to sort of cure people of their addiction. I think you have a theory, have you, how you can actually cure people?
Well, the addiction to this kind of machine is very similar to the problem you have with one-armed bandit addiction.
One-armed bandit addiction? Is he talking about No, surely not. Addicted or not, the medium's ascent was only strengthened further as games began invading the homes of the would-be one-armed bandits themselves. And while the rise in home computing may have taken people from out of the arcade parlour and into the comfort of their own homes, even there, the shmup as a genre was still immensely popular. Over half of the Atari 2600's top 10 best-selling games were shmups, or extremely close relatives of the genre. Unfortunately, trouble was brewing on the horizon, and in '83, the video game biz spectacularly crashed in a catastrophic turd storm that would see many American companies retreat from the market. Undoubtedly, the video games crash of '83 hurt the entire video gaming landscape, but perhaps none more so than the shoot-'em-up genre. To understand just why that is, requires us to look into one of the key factors that led to the crash in the first place. More specifically, the concept that the market had become oversaturated with poor quality titles, offering largely diminishing returns on IPs that had already been very successful. The shmup, being the most consistently successful genre, meant that its very success began to work against it. The market became bloated with space-themed shooters, the same games, the same scenarios over and over again, a never-ending conveyor belt of knock-off titles that can be quite appropriately summed up as being utterly joyless shit. The crash of '83 cleansed the home video game market like a biblical flood, and while it may not have been obviously apparent right then, the shmup's crown as king of the video gaming kingdom was washed away with it.
Do you like video games?
No.
Do you play them?
No.
Why?
It's a communist plot.
Thanks in no small measure to the efforts of developers in Japan, video games would bounce back, but the game had changed. Sure, shmups were still represented in arcades, with era-defining titles like R-Type, Gradius and Space Harrier, all proving fantastically popular riffs on the original formula. But at home, things were a very different story. You see, while Atari was lingering in corporate hell over in the States, in Japan, a company called Nintendo was setting themselves up for world domination. The NES is rightly identified as kickstarting the video gaming renaissance. Its huge library of quality games populated with colourful, infinitely marketable characters led to a renewed interest in the home video game market. What's more, the console was hooking people in with games that were much more invested in telling full-blown stories, the like of which hadn't been previously attempted by earlier titles. The shoot-'em-up genre was able to thrive because it thrust players into a simple narrative that they understood. An invading alien army is a high enough concept to immediately thrust the player into a tension-filled, high-stakes narrative, but the limitations of those early games meant that such narratives could only ever exist as superficial sims, mere pixels deep in terms of story and plot. Video games of the golden era suffered because they rarely offered any resolution to the scenarios that they offered. High scores became the only reason to persist with a game, because shoot-'em-ups routinely never offered a true ending, a victory for the player if you will. What the NES did so well was to offer the gamer a more strict gaming narrative. Here was a company merging old storytelling mediums with newer, more advanced interactive ones. Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Mega Man, all these games had a very definitive beginning and end. Save the princess, duff up the bad guy, bring peace to the land. They offered players resolution, and gamers reacted to that in an overwhelmingly positive way. Interestingly, it's at this point that we can start to see some firm data showing the shift in the shmup's popularity. Take a look at the best-selling NES games. There isn't a shoot-'em-up anywhere even close to the top of the list. Indeed, in terms of units sold, it's Xevious alone that has anything even resembling respectable sales numbers, with the bulk of its 1.26 million units shifted attributed to sales in Japan, a tragic sign of the times and of the declining popularity of the shmup genre. Even in arcades, while shmup titles continue to be released, taste had moved on to more visual and violent fare. Because let's be honest, who doesn't love beating, shooting, or otherwise fucking shit up? I mean, you'd have to be a proper freak not to enjoy that. The highest grossing titles in arcades post-crash of '83 reflects the change in taste of casual gamers. Double Dragon and Final Fight both performed very well under the banner of the beat-em-up genre, while Ghosts and Goblins, Outrun and Punch-Out all highlighted the plethora of different possibilities afforded by the more powerful technology operating in the media. Innovation was becoming commonplace, and the games that were performing best were the ones that were offering experiences that hadn't really been seen prior. Shmups, by comparison, were seemingly standing still, employing a strategy more in line with evolution than revolution. Different developers brought incremental change and elements of style, but by and large the Shmups formula remained largely unchanged. As the 90s entered the horizon, it was the turn of fighting games to enjoy blockbuster status, both at home and in the arcade. However, Street Fighter II and later Mortal Kombat proved to be something of a last hurrah for the ailing arcade scene, and it's around about this point when the death of the shmup as a blockbuster genre happens. And frankly, well, it's a genuine shame that their legacy as a hugely successful genre ends here. And why, I hear you ask? Well, because the majority of genuinely fantastic IPs begin to take shape at this very juncture. It's at this very point, in death no less, that the genre really began to morph into the form by which most enthusiasts recognise it today. With its popularity significantly compromised, developers of shmups began tailoring their titles to the core audience of gamers who had stayed with the genre from the start. The gamers who valued high scores and competitive challenge over cute characters and plot. Rather than break out from the niche it found itself in, it retreated even further into it, and as a direct result, in its embracing of the principles that originally shaped it, it was able to move forward in the most exciting of ways. Truxton is a game that exemplifies this shift best. The title itself translates as expert, and it's fitting given it's a game that wholeheartedly positions itself as one for true fans, favouring steep learning curves and insanely high levels of difficulty over the favoured pick up and play mode. Truxton declared loud and proud the new direction of the shmup genre, a direction that refused to cater to casual gamers, even at the expense of popularity and the high sales associated with it. And so the modern shmup was born, and if you didn't like it, well, that was just fine.
I think shmups during the 80s, when the R-Type came out in Gradius with amazing music, amazing graphics, it was the genre that moved things and it was blowing things up, it was laser, it was fire, and it was incredibly exciting to people. But as it progressed, it got harder and harder for people because obviously people got better and better at it. And I think a lot of people ended up growing up, so to speak, in the 20s and 30s, getting families and tailing off from the shoot 'em up, etc. But the people who were coming up then behind them, the next generation, were left with incredible difficult games they couldn't play.
Batsigan is perhaps the game that most acutely displayed this brave new attitude, throwing players into a world alive with bullets and strife. Both player and enemy became powered up beyond compare, the effect of which was a screen awash with projectiles, a living, breathing patchwork of brightly coloured bullets. It was frantic, overstimulating, and challenging beyond anything else gamers had seen at the time. It was heaven, while simultaneously an in-game hell. Bullet hell. A no more fitting name has perhaps ever been uttered in the pantheon of video gaming history. Toaplan, the development team responsible for Batsigan, would sadly cease to exist mere months after the game's release. A point that only further moves to emphasise the changing fortunes of the shmup genre. However, from the ashes of Batsigan's development team rose the phoenix-tinged image of Cave, a company many consider to be the single most important developer still releasing games under the shmup banner. From here, I could go on to talk about Radiant Silvergun, a game many called a masterpiece upon its release. I could mention Battle Garega or Ikaruga, games the both of which are considered best in show by most shmup aficionados, games that both embraced simple yet perfectly implemented game mechanics that were wholly innovative in the confines of the genre. But this isn't a tale lording critical darlings in an ever-decreasing niche. It's the story about a genre leading the charge in a brave new medium, and how it sadly and slowly disappeared from a limelight.